So I watched the Xbox/Bethesda showcase. I'm still not sure why they call it the Xbox/Bethesda showcase, since Bethesda is now part of Xbox. I would just call it the Xbox showcase. But the biggest thing I was looking forward to seeing was StarField. Yes, I was sort of caught up in the hype of, will they show something like Fable? Will they show something like Avowed? What's going on with Perfect Dark? But none of those games were there. It was essentially a StarField/Forza Motorsport game show. And if I'm honest, my initial impression of StarField wasn't particularly great. I was expecting StarField to be that stamp that Microsoft put down and said, here is our first party, here we are compared to the competition. When it comes to Sony and their first party, from a graphical standpoint, we are going to show you how talented our studios are, and this is it. Now, I'm not saying this is a bad looking game, and I think a lot of people that are using the comparison between Sony first party and this first party have a point and don't have a point. Much like everything else that people talk about, there's a plus and there's a minus, and most people pick a side. But in terms of comparing and contrasting them, say something like Horizon Forbidden West, that I feel personally is the best looking game I've seen this generation so far. It is an open world game. However, it is only one particular world that you're on. Now, there's tons of detail in that world, the character models, the animation. I mean, even things as minute as insects flying around. There are woodcutter ants carrying wood to their nest. Nothing to do with the game, just there to make the world believable. Tons of detail. StarField is an open world game, but it's more like an open universe game. It's not just one world that you're on, that they've got to pack in all this detail. It's an entire universe. So the larger a game gets, the scale, when it becomes larger, the graphics have to suffer a bit. And that's where I think the disappointment lied from my point of view. Now, when we get to the gameplay, it sort of spoke to me in a way that wasn't great. It seemed to be a bit generic. It was almost like watching Destiny, jumping around, shooting, floaty mechanics, jetpacks, stuff like that. They didn't carry over any of that vaults system from Fallout where the game pauses and you can pick different parts of the body. It's a straight up first-person shooter. I'm not sure if there are going to be other weapons. I'm almost positive that there has to be. Obviously, it's not just going to be this one gun here. But what differentiates this from every other shooter? The problem I had with StarField is that there are so many different things happening all at once. It's a shooter. It's a space exploration game. It's a resource management game. It's a base building game. It's a flight simulation game. So it's almost like a jack of all trades, but it doesn't seem to be a master of any one of those trades. So the more things that you pile into a game, the more chance you have for a certain number of things not to be that great. So if you've got two things that you do really, really well, I'd rather have that than 10 things that are just sort of mediocre, and maybe one out of those 10 is great. Now, I get it. They wanted to pack as much into this game as possible. They've done Elder Scrolls, they've done Fallout, they've done Dishonored, and every single one of those games has something similar to the previous game. This is sort of like everything they've ever done rolled into one, and that's where I have a bit of fear or worry when it comes to this game, because again, there has to be something cohesive about it. The main campaign has to be really, really good, and I really wasn't blown away by some of the things that I saw. The biggest disappointment for me was in the character models, the facial animations. It just didn't look any better than something like, say, Fallout 4 or even Elder Scrolls Skyrim. It's a step up from those, but it's definitely not what I expected from a next generation only first party Xbox Series X game. I want to be clear though, we have to come back to that word scope, and the larger something gets, something has to suffer. And I think the trade-off here for the scope was maybe some of the presentation, maybe some of the graphics, maybe some of the animations, and maybe when you play this game, maybe when I'm in the middle of exploring and there's so much for me to do and see, none of that stuff is really going to matter. But right now, at this show, this first showing, I was disappointed. I didn't expect it to be this. And maybe it's difficult for them to show a game with this much scale at one show. Maybe it's difficult to get the idea behind the gameplay. But I'm just not feeling like I'm into just exploring and going to get resources. I mean, if there's procedurally generated worlds, which there are, probably the majority of the 1,000 planets are procedurally generated, and most certainly those worlds are going to not have much to do on them other than say, hey, in order to get 30,000 pounds of zinc, we have to go to the zinc world, and when we're there, we're using a laser to mine zinc, and then we're bringing it back to another world and crafting and building a base, and then we're going into our ship and going to another world to progress the story, but then we've got to go back to that world once we get something else to progress the story, and in the meantime, we're having space battles. It just feels like there's so much in this game that it might be too much. And I know that a lot of people will hear that and say, well, do you want a scaled down version of a game? Why wouldn't you want a game with so much into it? And the reason is it's a game. It has to be doable. There has to be a story that doesn't get away from you. And I'm hoping that there are at least, say, 10 to 20 worlds tied to the story that are handcrafted. Todd Howard did say that this is the most handcrafting in any game that they've ever done. Now, Todd Howard has said a lot of things in the past that were not true, so once again, we're going to have to wait to play it. But my initial impression was this is a game that seems to have everything thrown into it. And I want to go back to that analogy I made where if you do 1 to 2 things really, really well, that's enough to make a game great. But the more things you throw at yourself, the more chances you give yourself to just not be able to meet those expectations. It's just too much. In terms of the building your ship and flying around, it would be great to be able to have that immersion to fly strictly from space all the way down to the planet, land, get out, explore, get back in your ship, and fly back out. No cutscene, no load times. That's something that I feel should be in a game like this because essentially that's what this game is about, space exploration. But we have to go back to that word scale and scope, and if the trade-off for all of the things that they want to put in this game is a couple of load screens, I'm okay with that. I want to be able to try the space combat. I want to be able to try all of the combat. This is the thing that I think doesn't come across. So when they showed this part here, it looked really cool. I wanted to fly down to that planet. I wanted to break through the atmosphere, land and explore. It begs for you to do that, and I know that you can't do that in this game. But the space combat, it looks good. I like the animation. I like the explosions. I like the way that the ship looks like it's handling. But again, it's space combat, it's first-person combat, it's base building, it's exploration, it's resource management. I mean, how much is too much at some point? But ultimately, I'm going to have to play the game. I can't just critique it based on this one showing. I don't think it was a particularly strong showing, and I want to go back to graphically. I was impressed with some parts. Like, this looks really good, but I've seen games look like this. Elite Dangerous looks like this. Even the game Chorus that just came out a little while ago. It's in Game Pass now. It looks like this. So this isn't anything that blows me away when it comes to a first-party offering on your premier hardware, the Xbox Series X. Scale, again, we have to come back to it. Every time I find a critique, I remind myself of the scale. Let me know what you think in the comments section below. Are you excited? Are you a little bit worried about this game? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.